think you're all going to be, you're in store for a great idea talks because we have an amazing speaker, some amazing content. So really excited for today's event. I'm going to jump right in it because I want to hear from Dave. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward quickly while folks are jumping in. So thank you for folks who are here on time. Really appreciate it. I'm just going to go ahead and share what today looks like. So we're going to start with some community agreements. I'm going to introduce who we are. Then we'll dive deep into the discussion that Dave is going to share with us today. Amazing content. And we're going to have a Q&A session. So I really enjoy our Q&A. You actually get to ask our speaker questions directly, and it's a great opportunity to learn more. And then we're going to close with some resources to share with you all. So just a few community agreements that we like to share is, of course, to foster a space for others, share the space here. Be kind to yourself and be kind to everyone here. We're all learning. Nobody's perfect and not everyone knows everything. Be curious, right? Keep an open mind and an open heart. And if you hear something today that, piques your interest, try it on, see how it fits. And I open you all to add to the community agreements if you like, if you want to pop that in the chat. I know we've been in, virtual for almost 3 years now, but I don't want to assume that everyone knows how to use Zoom. So you should have your control mute and video on the bottom of your screen there. Just to also be respectful is to make sure you're on mute until potentially our Q&A session, but sometimes there's some feedback noise. And if you'd like to share your beautiful faces with us, please go ahead and turn on that camera. And then that chat box, like I mentioned, if you want to pop in any community agreements to add, you can do that. And then for the Q&A session, you can also pop your questions into the chat as well. And for folks joining us for the first time, we are AAPA, the Asian American Professional Association. I'm Karen, the Executive Director, and I want to share with you basically what we do, right? Our main program is our mentorship program. It's a one-on-one mentoring program where you get matched with a mentor, go through your career goals, and you get a connection with this huge network of mentors. Not only do you get matched with one specifically for the year, but you get to tap into our diverse group of mentors, and we have some mentees with us here today. And then secondly, we have our board leadership program, which is a 6-month program where you actually get to learn how to be a board member of a nonprofit board. And the cool thing is that we have an internship component attached to that program. So folks actually get to sit on a nonprofit board as a board intern. And usually you get asked to be a board member of that board if you match. So that's the nice thing with our board leadership program, real practical training here. And then we have our own AAPA Toastmasters Club, where you get to work on your public speaking skills, develop those public speaking skills and communication. And what's nice is there's lots of representation because a lot of folks are Asian American and minority professionals. And we actually created this new program during pandemic, which is our virtual AAPI Idea Talks, which you're participating in with today. And they're virtual discussions with our community members about topics that matter to you, right? So this came about during pandemic. We're trying to connect with folks while we're virtual. And so you're actually participating in this program right now. So this talk came about through our Idea Talks. And so you can go ahead and keep in touch with us. We're on all the social media platforms, YouTube. You can also check out our website where you registered for this event. And there's a little QR code there if you'd like to check out our website. And of course, without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and pass it on to our speaker for today. I'm really excited to hear about the content that he's provided for us today and hear from Dave Liu, who's the author of The Way of the Wall Street Journal. So Dave, please go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks so much. And I wish I was doing the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, I'm so sorry. See, I stopped myself. Sorry, Dave.
No problem. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. And if somebody can just give me a thumbs up. Do you see the screen? Okay, perfect. All right, awesome. Okay, great. So hi everyone. I'm so excited to share with you some of the lessons from my 30-year career on Wall Street and Silicon Valley. Today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and the challenges I believe Asian Americans face in corporate America today. Share a few of the career tactics that helped me reach the executive and C-level suite. And much of what I'm going to talk about today is based on the book that I wrote called The Way of the Wall Street Warrior: Conquer the Corporate Game Using Tips, Tricks, and Smart Cuts. But before we jump into it, I want to tell you a little bit about why I wrote this book. So let me start with a confession. I never intended to write a book, but this all started because of these guys. I realized that one day my two boys will face many of the career frustrations I've seen many Asian Americans encounter in corporate America. Many are unhappy at work because they feel underpaid or undertitled. And I didn't want that to happen to my boys because as their dad, I only want what's best for them. I want them to be happy. So I started to write down all the tips, tricks, and tactics that I used in my career to rise to the top. And my goal was to one day give them this manifesto at their college graduation and say to them, here are all the things your old man learned the hard way. Don't make the same mistakes I've seen others make, and maximize your full potential by learning how to play the corporate game. But then I decided I could turn this thing into a philanthropic project. By publishing a book, I could share what I've learned with all Asian Americans by giving them tips on how to break the bamboo ceiling. I could also raise money and awareness for nonprofits that are meaningful to me by donating 100% of my net proceeds. So ones like Smile Train that repair clefts in kids, Asian American news sites like Asia News, entertainment collectives like Gold House, filmmaker training schools like BayCat, and a whole host of Asian American professional nonprofits like AAPA, NAP, and LEAP. And because the book has done quite well, I've been able to make contributions to all these nonprofits. And I'm very excited to share my tactics with you today. So let's start with my background. So I started my career as a career guy. Starting on the left, I worked on Wall Street for almost 25 years. I climbed the corporate ladder from what I call the janitor suite to the executive suite, where I became a managing director and co-head of the Internet and Digital Media Group at Jefferies. I worked with hundreds of companies, completed IPOs, M&A deals, and a whole host of transactions with top companies like Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo. During that time, I mentored hundreds of bankers. Many have gone on to many of the top business schools like Harvard and Wharton and Stanford, and some have become CEOs, managing directors of private equity firms, and very successful corporate execs. After leaving Wall Street, I became an entrepreneur. I founded multiple companies in tech, asset management, media, and merchant banking. For each of them, I took them from a napkin to an established enterprise. One of the companies that I founded reached about 1,000 employees and several hundred million in revenue. One of the companies that I did start is a merchant bank where I make VC investments and I advise companies. For all of my companies, I'm the CEO or founder's consigliere. So I not only invest in these companies, but I also give them advice on everything from financing, strategy to HR. Fortunately, many of my companies have done well, and 5 of them are billion-dollar unicorns. On the right, you'll see that I'm not just a corporate guy, I'm a creator. I love to draw. I have a cartoon series called The ABC Life about Asian American family. And as I mentioned earlier, my book was published by Wiley. I published it last year, November 9th. It's an Amazon bestseller, and Bloomberg said it was one of the best books of 2021. I'm also a big believer in giving back and serve charities like Smile Train. I serve on the executive board of the M&T program at Penn, and I help manage the endowment of the National Engineering Honor Society, Tau Beta Pi. Last but not least, I'm vice chairman of Asia Am News, a nonprofit organization dedicated to maintaining a website for advancing stories that are important to our community. In terms of my corporate career, here's a quick timeline. So I joined Jefferies in 1993 when it had fewer than 200 employees and under 20 bankers. I was the youngest hire in the firm's history at 20 years old, and I became an associate in 18 months. I left and went to Harvard Business School and then returned and moved to Silicon Valley to help build the firm's technology practice. I became managing director and co-head when I was 33, and I was one of the youngest MDs and one of the few people of color at that level. I was an MD for almost a decade, then retired after almost 25 years at the firm. In all, I was among the top 1% of longest tenured members of the firm, which now has about 3,000 employees. As a quick sidebar, diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI is a big buzzword today, but on Wall Street, it's still largely a white man's world. It was even more so when I was climbing the ladder. Asian Americans actually over-index at the entry and junior level, but many leave or flame out by middle management. And given that there are so few Asians at the senior level, our attrition rate is actually higher than any other ethnic group, and has actually led to the term the bamboo ceiling. And so I want to help break this, and so I wrote down the tactics that I use in my book, and I share some of the tidbits from my book through talks like this. So that's my background and career in a nutshell. Okay, now let me tell you my goal with my book and this talk. I love film, especially The Matrix. In the movie, the main star Neo is given the option to take a blue pill, which will keep them in his current state of mind, or a red pill, which will open up his mind to a new reality, a new way of thinking. This is also my goal. I believe after 30 years of being in corporate America, I believe that the world isn't fair and that the corporate game is exactly that, a game, where the rules are fluid and working hard and keeping your head down can actually be a recipe for disaster. It can be a one-way trip to an unfulfilling career, or even worse, ejection at middle management. I went to HBS and Wharton, and I've had hundreds of hours of HR and leadership training. And I can definitively say that I did not learn anything of practical use in any of those training courses or schools. Everything I learned to win the corporate game was taught to me in the School of Hard Knocks and largely through trial and error. And so hopefully by sharing some of what I've learned, I can save you a little bit of pain and suffering. I've often been asked, kind of cutting to the chase, so what's your secret? Unfortunately, there's no one silver bullet. But if I were forced to distill the essence of how I was able to break through the bamboo ceiling, I'd say it's really a combination of two things. One, I worked hard, like really hard, 80 to 120 hours per week over 25 years. I made sure I was always one of the first in the office and one of the last to leave, and I focused on being one of the most productive people at the firm. The second is really understanding what makes people tick, understanding their motivations, and then building incentives and strategies around it. So for more than 50 years, there's actually been a ton of research into fields like cognitive science or the study of how people think. And what is revealed is that people are irrational, that they aren't necessarily motivated by the obvious. But once you understand what motivates them, then you can figure out how to have them help you. And that's what I've used a lot in my career. So in summary, for me, it's really been a combination of one, hard work, and two, understanding how to incent people to do what I need them to do to help me. Now, I'm going to start by covering a few of the challenges I see Asian Americans face in the workplace, and then I'll cover some tactics that I use to overcome them. Like I said, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is a big focus of corporate America today. It's a recognition that the system is rigged against minorities and things need to change to level the playing field. But I can tell you, in my almost 30 years of working on Wall Street, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, spending time in nonprofits, I see almost no real emphasis on management diversity. So it's as though that the focus is on getting a melting pot at the base camp of Mount Everest, but not at the summit, where the stakes are exponentially higher, where the compensation is exponentially higher and the title and power are exponentially higher. That's why I believe that if you want to be if you're part of a marginalized group and you want to reach the summit, you have to assume that you're on your own. There are a lot of studies to back this up. So for example, here's a chart from the report in the US House and Financial Services Committee meeting, where they analyzed the country's biggest banks. And guess what they found? That minorities represent less than 1/5 of all senior roles. And when you look at it even more closely, Asian Americans are the least likely to get promoted at all of the big banks. According to Harvard Business Review, this exists even at the top firms who are purportedly the most progressive. So for example, Goldman Sachs, which is arguably viewed as one of the top firms, reports that 27% of its professional workforce was Asian American, but only 11% of its senior managers and 0 of its executive officers. And if you think this only applies on Wall Street, look at Silicon Valley, where I spend a lot of my time. Check out the leadership of companies like Apple and Amazon. At Apple, there's only one person of color in their executive ranks, and it's because she runs China. She's actually not American, she's Chinese from mainland China. And at Amazon, there are none, despite Asian Americans accounting for more than 1/3 of the workforce. And these two companies are routinely ranked as two of the best companies in the world. So why is this? Well, I believe that for Asian Americans, it's harder because for almost half a century, we've been hampered by the model minority myth. It's defined this as a monolithic minority group that's super successful. As this Time magazine cover from 1987, or 35 years ago, shows, we're all whiz kids, we're all super smart, we're hardworking, and we're math geniuses. So why is this characterization negative? I mean, who wouldn't want to be known as a genius? Well, first off, this stereotype was actually perpetuated to contrast us against other minority groups in an attempt to say that all people of color don't need any help. And if all people of color just worked as hard as Asians, they'd all be successful. These stereotypes also further reinforce the notion that Asian Americans have actually outperformed American peers and don't need any help at all. In fact, there's a perception that we've overachieved, particularly in areas like academia. And this myth is ingrained in corporate America. As shown here, the model minority traits of hard work, education, obedience, following orders actually helps us at the junior level, but these same characteristics are fatal at higher altitudes in corporate America. As you look up the corporate ladder, these traits are what makes Asian Americans not leadership material. And this bias has been around for 50 years, so I'm not sure it's going to go away anytime soon. So the key takeaway is you need to know how to leverage or combat these biases if you want to get ahead in corporate America. Now, I've worked across hundreds of industries throughout my career, and I've seen firsthand how DEI priorities are set in corporate America. And unfortunately, Asian Americans typically rank at the bottom of the list. Oftentimes, Asians aren't even considered a minority in America. And so, unfortunately, someone has to come in last. To make matters worse, Asian Americans are the smallest ethnic minority compared to Caucasians, Latinx American, African American, and we're highly fragmented with the smallest political base, and we're not monolithic, comprising of people with ancestors from China, India, Southeast Asia, and we're generally treated as a professional foreigner, not native in this country. Typically the most alien in not only corporate America, but in American society at large. In other words, we stick out like a sore thumb. Ironically, in most ethnic breakdowns of corporate America that I've seen, we're treated as white adjacent. Essentially, we're the same as Caucasians, but without the Cauc. So we have the worst combination, the smallest minority with the most obvious foreign features, but treated like the majority with no special dispensation. So how does this actually manifest itself when Asians are climbing the corporate ladder? Well, let's first start by acknowledging that success is not a straight line to the summit. Your career path will not be perfect. You'll meander, you'll take wrong turns, you'll make mistakes, you'll screw up. But in fact, that's actually good because in my experience, if you don't screw up, then you're not taking enough risk and you're not plowing new opportunities and you're not proving that you're indispensable. So with this backdrop, the key question is, what do those of the same ethnicity and gender as the majority in power, what do they have as an advantage? In my experience, if you're the same gender and ethnicity of those in power, then you get the most powerful benefit in business, and that's the benefit of the doubt. So what happens when you screw up, but you're the same gender and ethnicity of your boss? Well, he, and it's typically he will think, well, I was a real screw up when I was that age, but look how I turned out. Not bad. In fact, I'm pretty awesome. So if you're the same gender and ethnicity of your boss, and typically it's a white man in America, you'll get the benefit of the doubt. If not, you have to prove yourself over and over and work twice as hard. Aside from working twice as hard, it's also important to realize that the value of relationship capital, or the sum of all the relationships you need to achieve your goals. And this is especially important for women. In fact, there's been a lot of research. Recently, there was research done by Working Mothers Gender Gap that show that women are actually 1/3 less likely to recognize and use relationship capital in their career. And what I found is that women and Asian Americans aren't actually told that leveraging relationships is absolutely critical early in their career. In fact, most of them are taught or told that doing that is not good. They associate relationship capital with office politics, and they avoid it at all costs. And that's why women and Asian Americans typically start behind the 8 ball when they start their careers, and it snowballs from there. Here's just a cartoon that I love, and I think every young professional should see. And you can see the text below. It says, you can't take ass kissing 102 until you take brown nosing 101. Now, obviously, this is tongue in cheek, but you get the idea. You need to build relationships early and often. As Asian Americans, to get ahead, you need to accept that you got a raw deal and quickly build that capital. And if you do it correctly, you can zoom past others who aren't as savvy. Now, there are lots of ways to build relationship capital, but in my experience, the single best way to do this is to do favors for people constantly. Be the Santa Claus of the office. If others need help, help them. Build that bank of chits and favors. And fundamentally, it leverages a human bias called reciprocity bias, which is when we feel compelled to help people who have helped us. So start handing out those presents earlier in your career. Now, as an Asian American, I really do believe that we have the best of both Eastern and Western culture. But what we need to recognize is that sometimes our heritage actually holds us back in corporate America. Some of you may be familiar with the I Ching. This is the best known Chinese book in the world. In it, there are teachings of an ancient Chinese philosophy where opposite forces are seen as interconnected and counterbalancing. It's commonly represented by the symbol, the yin yang symbol. And for many of us, we're taught that the world around us is black and white, and that we need to be respectful of nature, our family, our elders. And I'll tell you, this mindset is great for students and for junior people, but actually works against us as we rise in corporate America, which is not black and white. So here are a few mindset changes that I think need to occur if you want to succeed up the corporate ladder. So first off, we're trained to respect our elders, our bosses. My view is we should, but that respect must be earned. We think office politics is bad because frankly it is, but politics are a reality of corporate life. We think the world is a meritocracy because we're raised that way. And I'm sorry to break it to you, but it isn't. This is a fallacy. So many people who get ahead aren't actually really deserving of it. I'm sure you see people in your office that fit this bill, maybe even your boss. We have a new immigrant mentality, which is don't rock the boat. Well, why do we hold ourselves back just because we got here in the most recent vote? We're just as worthy as anyone else. And for many of us, our first names are actually our surnames. Our ancestors are part of our identity. And I agree, but we also need to forge our own path, even if we fail. We need to stop worrying about how our failures might stain our family name because we take risks, and only if we take risks can we reap rewards. So these are just examples, I think, of elements of our Asian mindset that can actually hold us back. If you want to rise to the top, you need to flex. You need to be able to look at some of these sacred beliefs and embrace some self-interest. You need to look out for yourself and fight for what you really deserve. Because if you don't, nobody else will. I found that this Eastern mindset gets ingrained in us when we're really young and becomes part of our DNA. So here's a cartoon I drew to illustrate this point. This starts when we're really young. We get our latest report card, and when we get all A's and one B, we all know what happens. Our parents say to us, "Why'd you get that B?" And this mentality gets pounded into us throughout school and stays with us when we enter the workforce. We're essentially trained to believe that we need to be good at everything to succeed. Now, this really hurts us when it's time for promotion up the corporate ladder. So we try to be good at everything, but time is a zero-sum game. And by trying to be good at everything, we're not great at any one thing. Other candidates realize that to rise the corporate ladder, there's usually only one or two things that the organization really, really values. They learn that if you're great at that one thing that the organization values, then that can actually make up for all your other deficiencies. So they focus their energies on that one skill that's needed. So other candidates may not be as good at everything as you are, but they hone that one thing that defines leadership in their firm. So on Wall Street, that might be salesmanship. In Silicon Valley, it might be product development. In other industries, it might be just covering your ass and being political. But when promotion time comes and only one person can get promoted, guess who gets it? Middle manager B, the person who is great at that one thing that really matters. And this explains why, as you get older and you get more senior and you look around your company, you may ask yourself, how is this guy my boss? They're not as reliable. They're not as good at problem solving. They aren't even great teammates. So what the heck? Well, it's because they've mastered that one thing that the company really values: salesmanship in banking, politics in some companies. So when push comes to shove, others get promoted over you because they're viewed as having more leadership potential. The bottom line is that as you climb the corporate ladder, you learn that being great at one thing, at that one thing your company values, is better than being good at everything. And so figure out what that is and work on that and be ready to sacrifice some of your other skills. Now, I want to share some key tactics that worked for me in breaking through the ceiling. Every person's situation is different, so what worked for me may not work for you, but perhaps you can take a few of my ideas and advance your career. So let's start with a little bit of science. So Danny Kahneman, the godfather of behavioral economics, explained that human beings are actually made up of two selves: the experiencing self and the remembering self. In a nutshell, the experiencing self lives your life and lives in the present. The remembering self evaluates your experiences, draws lessons from them, and decides your future. It keeps a tally as your chief historian. And what Kahneman discovered, that the memory of an experience differs from how it happened. The experiencing self is not the same as a remembering self. And he proved this through looking at colonoscopies. And what he learned was that even though the colonoscopy was shorter in duration, the ones that ended with higher pain were remembered as being far worse than those that were longer but ended in a less severe note. And so what he concluded was that the remembering self is influenced by the ending more than anything else. In other words, endings are way more important than beginnings when you have interactions with people. With this in mind, let me tell you one of my philosophies. If it ain't written down, it ain't true. So one really effective way to advance your career is to always make sure you have the final word in writing, because it becomes the official record for your career. So anything good about you should always be in writing. Conversely, anything bad should be verbal, because research has shown that people rarely recall the facts of a conversation, just the feeling. So you want any bad associations, bad conversations to fade into the background over time. You do this by making sure that any bad stuff is actually covered verbally. Putting these concepts together, I would always make sure that I would get in the last word. It would be good and it would be in writing. So when the project is all said and done, be sure to get clients, bosses, or colleagues to write emails to you for a job well done. And these thank you notes are essentially your future currency, the stone tablets recording your great deeds. I'd send thank you notes to clients, which would get me a return thank you note with a stronger appreciation for my work, sometimes more than that, frankly, I deserve. And I kept these thank you notes for posterity, especially in those situations where there were multiple people involved and I might need to jockey for credit at year-end bonus time. So always end every interaction on a positive note. Even to this day, I'm surprised with the number of people who don't do this. Build that file, build that written dossier of all your achievements. Now, another tip is unus is Latin for the word one and only, and is the root of the word unique. And I always think about this word whenever I'm in competition for anything, a job, a deal, a project, a promotion. To me, it means focusing on making it clear how I'm different from everyone else. Even if I didn't have relevant experience, I'd show how I could bring a new perspective or be additive to the team. I did all of this so I would come across as unique. Sometimes you might not even realize it, but you may have that one attribute that will put you over the edge over other candidates. So at the start of my career, when I was interviewing at Jefferies, I happened to mention to my interviewer that I knew how to program in COBOL. I didn't think it was important because it was an archaic programming language designed in the 1950s. But once my interviewer found out, he rushed to get others to interview me, and ultimately I got the job. And what I learned later was that Jefferies actually had a securitization platform, software platform, that was taken from another firm, and it was written completely in COBOL. And nobody at Jefferies knew how to customize it. So by hiring me, they not only got someone who could do Excel and PowerPoint, but could also do COBOL programming if the need arose. So I was the only candidate who they spoke to who had this knowledge, and so effectively I was unus. So the secret to getting what you want is projecting yourself as unique and taking advantage of scarcity. You're a durable good, and you have to make others want to buy you, and only you. If you don't, there's always someone else who might cost less and probably is more obedient. So accentuate attributes that only a few can claim, because scarcity pays, and that's how you maximize your value. Now, early in my career, I stood out because of my ethnicity. All my bosses were white men, but rather than sulk about how I was a minority, I thought about how do I use this to my advantage? I thought about how could I judo some of the model minority myths to my advantage? So for example, hardworking. Everyone actually thought that if they used me on a project, I'd work harder than all the others to get it done. No one ever questioned my work ethic. But some Fridays, I'd actually go home and take a nap. I'm sure everyone assumed I was hard at work, not sleeping at home. But this actually helped me recharge and was really the only way I could keep working harder than everyone else and clock in over 100 hours per week for more than a decade. Another stereotype is that we're highly educated. So because I was viewed as academically smart, I effectively became mentee number one to some of the senior people who were willing to invest the time to teach me about new M&A or capital markets techniques. And I ate all this stuff like a sponge. And when I went to business school a few years later, I realized how much more I knew about finance than any of my other classmates. So being the teacher's pet, I got a leg up on everybody else. Another characteristic that we get characterized by is obedience. So on occasion, I would complain about coworkers or bosses. And what I found was that senior people would actually listen to me. I didn't have a reputation as a complainer or the boy who cried wolf. So when I did complain, change happened to my advantage. I got off all the crappy deals. I got out of working for lousy bosses, and I got specifically on projects that would help my career. And that actually comes in kind of in another area, which is, we're typically viewed as like more subservient than others. Well, because I was viewed as a good follower and not as someone who was a threat to anyone, I get staffed on good deals and projects. I've worked really hard to learn the job of my bosses. And by the time it was clear that I made my manager or my bosses expendable, it was frankly too late for them to do anything about it. So I showed my superiors that I had what it would take to get to the next level. And I'm positive I would not have risen as quickly if I was viewed as a threat by some of the people that I was working for. So these are just a few examples of how I use some of these negative Asian American biases to my advantage and help me rise faster in the firm than anyone else. But I didn't let the negative biases get reinforced. I didn't just let those get reinforced. I worked on neutering the negative biases. For me, some of the biggest ones were that I was just some worker bee, that I wasn't leadership material. And obviously, with that negative bias, I couldn't be queen bee overnight. So how did I solve this? So I did it by taking evolutionary steps and not expecting to conquer Rome in a day. I found beachheads and moved up the ladder of leadership by first volunteering to do, frankly, the crappy jobs that no one else wanted to do. I call it the poop patrol. So the dirty little secret on Wall Street is that the jobs that nobody else wants to do are usually those jobs that have no revenue associated with them. So things like recruiting, training, and conferences. So I rose my hand and I volunteered for all those things. And I was able to show that I could speak in front of a group of lots of people and be dynamic. I showed that I could carry conversation at conferences with CEOs. And over time, my superiors and some of the other seniors, people in the firm, started to recognize, oh, maybe Dave isn't just some number cruncher. Maybe he's someone that we can actually put out there in front of clients. And so once I proved myself in these non-revenue generating cases, I pushed for revenue generating situations. I pushed for pitching live clients. I pushed for expansion of my team. And over time, I was able to build my own book of business and ultimately get promoted. So by going from what I call the poop patrol to live ammunition drills over time, I slowly became essentially the leadership material that the firm was looking for. But I also made sure that I busted every other stereotype they had around Asian Americans. And so here's a little bit of a funny one, as an example, because I think a lot of Asian Americans are considered boring or bookworms. Okay, so you get the idea. So as my firm would learn later, I was actually the unofficial chugging champion at Penn and also at Jefferies. And it totally changed kind of their viewpoint of me, because I think for many of them, they thought of me as just this, antisocial bookworm type. Now, if I was ever in doubt as to how to act, I'd remind myself of prospect theory, which is the same guy I talked about earlier, Danny Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner. This was the core theory that he won on. And in layman's terms, what prospect theory is that he proved that humans are 2 times more risk averse than risk loving. And it's the reason why, frankly, bosses are less willing to bet on new people, unless these new people can prove that they're a safe bet and have huge upside potential. And as you can imagine, this makes it doubly difficult if you're Asian American, because you're not viewed as a leader to begin with. So when I was moving up the corporate ladder, I would always make sure that I would come across as a safe pair of hands for all the junior and middle management work. Things like building models, proofing presentations, performing punctual work. And in fact, I got known for something called the Lou triple check, because everybody knew that when I made my work, it was impeccable because I checked everything 3 times before submitting it. And once I had those table stakes covered, I'd show them that I had more than half a brain and could make succinct client recommendations. I could manage a team. I could identify new prospects. And by punching above my weight class, I showed that I had the upside potential to progress to the next level. So in short, I essentially became a living embodiment of prospect theory. But I never forgot about people's risk aversion. And I always made sure that I covered the basics first before asking for more. I was always a safe pair of hands with huge upside potential. Now, to rise up the corporate ladder, I also knew I needed to change my appearance. So I was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate, which left scars all over my face. And when I was a junior guy, I was obese. I looked like your typical bookworm. I didn't have any money when I started my career, so I bought TJ Maxx clearance rack. I wore seersucker suits. But as I rose the corporate ladder, I started to change my appearance to match the role I wanted to play. So I upgraded to Armani, to Hugo Boss. I ditched the glasses, and I even changed my facial appearance. I grew a mustache and goatee, which you see now. And for a while, I even grew my hair a little long, so I looked a little bit like a Japanese gangster in an extra in a Japanese gangster film. It didn't have any real effect on my capabilities, but I became even more recognizable as a big Chinese guy with a badass mustache. And as I started to find my groove, I started to win over clients, and I started to be very different. In a sea of Caucasian Brooks brother bankers, I stood out like this Yakuza hitman. And because of my clefts, I spent my entire childhood in hospitals and actually underwent 11 craniofacial surgeries, which left noticeable scars on my face. Now, when you're born with a facial difference, people stare at you like a walking car crash. They can't look away. So I actually turned this liability into an asset. I used the scars in the middle of my face to my advantage. Because one of the unintended benefits of having so many scars is people will always remember the billboard plastered on your face. In my entire career, I don't recall anyone not remembering me. So whenever I met someone who could help advance my career, I tried my hardest to make our meeting memorable. I'd always have, one insightful thing to say at every meeting, no matter how junior I was. So unless my boss told me to shut up or, be quiet, I'd be sure to chime in so that in a conference room full of old white guys, instead of being remembered as that Chinese guy with scars, I'd be remembered as that smart Chinese guy with scars who said something helpful. So obviously, even if you don't have scars on your face, if you're the only Asian in a room full of Caucasians, if you're the only woman in a room full of guys, I think you can use this too. You'll stand out whether you like it or not. So why not use it to your advantage? Say something memorable. Don't let that billboard go to waste. So to recap, here are a few things I did to break through the bamboo ceiling. One, I built relationship capital early in my career by being Santa, dishing out favors like they were going out of style. I focused all my energies, as I got to middle management, I focused all my energies on the one superpower that I knew would make me senior in Wall Street, and that was salesmanship. I always got in the last word in writing for future use in compensation and promotion discussions. I always try to be unis, a diamond in the rough, and make my contributions and skills seem unique. I leverage the fact that I could be a good foot soldier and a junior person to work with the best managers on the best deals. And I started small. I worked my way up the evolutionary ladder by doing crew patrol, stuff that nobody else wanted to do, and then I graduated to live ammunition drills. I busted all those biases that, frankly, that we suffer under, and I continue to surprise them, to keep them guessing. And I was always cognizant of prospect theory and risk aversion, and mastered the basics before asking for more work or more seniority. I changed up my appearance to be more of a hitman, less of a gearhead, and again, break the stereotypes. And finally, I used the spotlight on my ethnicity and my birth difference to my own benefit. So as I mentioned earlier, this presentation is excerpts from a couple chapters in my book. So a couple comments if you want to read it. I wrote a book that I wish I had at Harvard and at Penn. It's about 270 pages, but it's 30 chapters. So every chapter is actually relatively short. And I begin every chapter with a cartoon and end with key takeaways. And that way, you can read the cartoon and skim the takeaways in 30 seconds. And if you think it's interesting, read the chapter. Otherwise, skip. Don't waste your time. And I divided the book into 4 segments. So part 1 is about getting in the game, starting your career, winning that project. Part 2 is about, okay, now that you're hired, what next? What do you need to work on? What are the building blocks you need to work on? Part 3 is about when you're near that brass ring, that partner role, the MD, the CEO job, the top job. And then part 4 is about everything else once you've achieved all your career goals. So your family, your brand, your purpose. And I wrote this book so my boys could keep this book around, ideally for the rest of their lives, and refer to it from time to time whenever they feel they're stuck in a rut. The book is written so the tactics apply in all industries. So if my boys went into Wall Street, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, Madison Avenue, they could still apply the same tactics in any hard-nosed industry. And as I mentioned earlier, the book's been very well received. It's a Bloomberg Best Book of 2021, Porsche Light, and Amazon bestseller. And I've donated 100% of the net proceeds to charity. So if you do like the book, if you do get the book and you like it, I appreciate if you write a review on Amazon so other people who feel underrepresented can find the book. So one last piece of advice. So I'm often asked by a lot of people, how do I know when to stay or when to leave my job or my career? And I don't have a perfect answer for that, but let me answer by sharing the Ikigai framework. This is actually one of the few frameworks I really, really like. Ikigai is a Japanese concept that means something similar to reason for being. It suggests that you can find your purpose by doing the following: working on something that, 1, you're good at, 2, you love, 3, the world needs, and 4, can be paid for. And if you can find something that fulfills all of these 4 criteria, then you'll have a long and fulfilling career. And I think for Asian Americans in particular, I think it's especially important to find this overlapping area, because many, many Asian Americans I know follow their parents' dreams, or they feel a huge amount of societal pressure to follow a specific path. But that path leads to unhappiness. So I always suggest that we all step back and reevaluate our Ikigai from time to time, ideally annually. Answer these 4 questions and figure out whether you're on the same path. And determine, what do I need to do in order to stay on this path or get off on a different path. And I don't think you ever want to settle, because if you settle, then you ultimately lead to a life of unhappiness. So that concludes my chat for today. I hope you've learned something useful, or in the very least, were a little entertained. I'd like to thank AAPA, Karen and Francis, for having me today. If you'd like to contact me directly, feel free to email me. You can reach me directly on my website. I answer all emails. And thanks again. I'm happy to answer any questions now.
Thank you so much, Dave. I was frantically taking notes as you were going through your slides. So Thank you so very much. And yes, I do want to move on to our Q&A session, and I want to open it up to you all here with us today. This is a great opportunity now that we have Dave sharing the space with you. So I welcome you all to unmute. And if you have any comments or questions for Dave, please go ahead and take advantage of this time to do so. So thank you so much, Dave.
Sure.
I would say don't be shy, as Dave shared that slide that says, have something insightful, at least one thing to say.
Yeah.
Oh, unmute. You should have a toolbar on the bottom left corner. There should be a mute button. So if you click on that, you should be able to unmute. But if you're having issues, we can always help unmute you as well.
Hi, Karen. This is Will. Can you hear me?
Hi, Will. Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, David. Hi, Dave. Thanks for this really insightful session. Really love it. I was taking notes as well, like really hard, jotting down everything that you mentioned. So one question I have as Asian American is, especially like going into a higher level in corporate America, is how do you really find your voice in those senior leadership meetings where you're with the C-level, with the VPs? How do you really like speak up and be seen and heard? Because I oftentimes notice that, especially with other maturity in the room, where you can notice their body language, that they're like, oh, okay, you're an Asian, like you know, you're really good at data and different, like how you present yourself, but the voice, I sometimes find hard to like own the room and speak up in those situations. So is there any tips or advice that you would recommend from your experience?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I will say is you have to have a certain mindset, which I do, which is that as you're going up the corporate ladder in highly compensated, highly competitive industries, sitting pat is not an option. Like just you know, you're not. This is not the days of you know, lifetime employment and a situation where you can just keep doing the same job and get paid well for like 40 years and not advance. On Wall Street, in a lot of the industries I highlighted, you know, Madison Avenue, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, it is an up or out industry. You know, everybody is always looking for a cheaper, younger model. And that's the first thing you just have to get your head around, right? And I'm sorry to say that, but like I've been involved in hundreds of industries and companies, and at the upper echelons where we're thinking about vice president, senior vice president, C-level execs, that's what board of directors, that's what shareholders are always thinking. Like, is this actually the best person to have this seat, or is there someone better to have this seat? And so if you subscribe and accept what I just said, you can't be quiet. You have to speak up, because just sitting there and not making a point or showing your voice is a recipe for disaster. You will ultimately get you'll ultimately work your way out of a job, because they'll find someone else who's cheaper, younger, maybe a better cultural fit, you know, better leadership material, right? So with that mindset, which frankly I had, because you know I'm looking around. I was running the internet digital media group, and if I'm being somewhat generous, there are only really 12 banks that really matter. There are 12 banks that can take any hot internet company public. And when I was in that seat, I knew that I was sitting in one of 12 seats around the world that were really valuable. And I wasn't under any illusion that all the people that worked for me wanted my job. You know, and that was okay, because eventually I knew I was going to leave anyway at some point. But it forced me to really think carefully about how am I going to use my time when I'm in the office or with my boss or with clients. And it made me really think about every interaction as kind of a performance. Every interaction was like, okay, you only spend a certain amount of time with your boss, with clients, people like that. Are they going to come away from that interaction thinking like, you know, that was a really good use of time with Dave? Or it's like, hey man, I wish I could get 30 minutes back. That was a complete waste of time. And so I spent a ton of time preparing for every interaction, and kind of like my upbringing about trying to be that smart Chinese guy with scars and not just some Chinese guy sitting there with scars. I would prepare for every interaction and think, okay, what are one or two really insightful things that I can bring to this interaction with my boss or a client, so that they go like, you know what, this kid's pretty smart. Like, this kid can bring some value. So if you have a little bit of that desperation, I think what will happen is it'll unlock more creativity around your voice. It'll unlock, like, you know what, I can't be known as like just the data guy or the bean counter, right? And is there something I can contribute to, you know, a marketing meeting or a product meeting, right? That I know will come across well, right? And obviously that's the $1 million question, but that's where you got to prepare. And so, you know, like for me, when I was running my tech company, most of my background was finance, M&A, and I knew immediately all these Silicon Valley guys were looking at me and like, oh yeah, this guy's some Wall Street chump who thinks that he can run a Silicon Valley company, right? And so I read every book I could find about product management. I talked to all my buddies who were product managers across Silicon Valley. And whenever I went into a product meeting, I would basically be the devil's advocate, but also the voice of the customer, right? And everybody knew that I wasn't classically trained in product, but I knew that people really valued the fact that I wasn't trained in product. Like, I was coming from a different perspective. So I give you that example because just because, you know, you want to like participate in something that you don't know a ton about, I do believe that you can prepare and come at it from a different angle that can still illustrate to your peers and other people around you, hey, this guy has a voice. This guy has something unique to add, not just like, hey, there's a balance sheet balance, or are we going to hit payroll this year, right? It's going to be like, no, we got to have Will in these meetings because Will looks at it from a different perspective that, in fact, is quite helpful to advancing the business.
I think that's super helpful. What I'm hearing is like preparation and desperation for like finding my voice when in those meetings, and like prepare that before I go in, and I think that's will boost the confidence, right? And help me speak up in those high stake meetings.
Yeah, and the desperation element is not all people want that. Okay, like you know, I have two brothers. They are lifetime middle management guys, and they're totally fine with it. Right, one has been at IBM, now Kyndryl. Right, he's been at IBM for 20+ years, and he's totally fine being a middle manager. Right, and I keep telling him, hey man, you know, you're getting close to 50. And there's going to come a time where they're going to retire you out, and he's okay with that, right? But if you are ambitious and you want to advance your career, I think you have to understand that the stakes will get exponentially higher as you go higher and higher, because the compensation will grow exponentially, the title, the power will grow exponentially, which means that you've got to have a sense of desperation, because those are the juicy jobs that other people want.
That's great. Thanks, Dave.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for that robust answer, Dave. I think Kayleen, were you able to work out your mute? Did you want to ask Dave a question?
Yeah. Hi, Dave. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of your insight. I truly appreciate you imparting all of this knowledge that comes from the School of Hard Knocks. You're incredibly inspiring. So I was an e-commerce entrepreneur for 7 years. I just entered the tech industry.
Oh, I think we lost you. Your mute button went on.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, so I was an e-commerce entrepreneur for 7 years, and I just entered the tech industry into HR through a referral. And I'm going to be honest, like there's no way in hell I could have entered the tech industry without having had like a senior referral. And so my goal is to eventually become CPO. What I'm curious about is how exactly did you first jump from middle management to executive level? Was it like through a connection, or was it through straight up applying?
No, so from on Wall Street, from going from the middle management to the managing director at executive level, that was like I said in the presentation, that was taking evolutionary steps. So proving that I wasn't just some geeky Asian American guy who couldn't put two words together. And I started to do a lot of big recruiting events, and I ran a lot of our tech conferences where there were hundreds of institutional investors and hundreds of CEOs. And even though it wasn't revenue generating, I would be on stage. I would be the Bob Barker. I'd be the MC, right? So people, I knew this had an impact on my bosses because there was already a bias around like, hey, this guy is not like funny. He's not, someone that can be out in front of clients. But I scripted tons of jokes. I ran lots of panels, right? So I totally busted the myth around like, hey, this guy's just a middle manager. And once they started to see, hey, you can put Dave in front of clients. He's not going to embarrass us, right? I started to say, hey, I want to have the opportunity to pitch live clients. So I didn't get into this in the presentation, but I talk a little bit about this in my book. What I did was I used to go to my boss and say, hey, we got this big pitch in Chicago, just picking a random city, right? We got this big pitch in Chicago on Thursday. Can I stick around on Friday? You go home. I'll stick around Friday because I want to meet with like a bunch of these second, third tier companies and a bunch of these second, third tier VCs that you have no interest in meeting, right? And what I would do at these meetings was two things. One was I would practice my spiel like constantly. And I'm talking like I did probably like 100 pitches before I realized like, okay, I suck. Like this is bad, right? So I did hundreds and hundreds of like pitches with live people, right? Listening. Some of them were like looking at me, man, this is boring. Like this guy has nothing to add, right? But then over time, I actually got pretty good at it, right? And then that eventually came into situations where like a pig sniffing for truffles. Eventually, like some of those actually turned into live clients, right? And that was when my boss and his boss started to look at me going, oh, Dave can actually generate some revenue. Like, he's not just some gearhead. And that helped me build a book of business. And then, ultimately at some point in my career, it came down to, okay, let's get rid of Dave's boss and give Dave's boss, Dave will get his job, right? So that's how I cracked through kind of that bamboo ceiling on Wall Street. In Silicon Valley, it was different because I had already retired from Wall Street. And the best way to break the bamboo ceiling in Silicon Valley is to be a founder, right? Which I was. And so actually, I don't put founders in the same bucket, right? Because if you're Jerry Yang or Eric Yuan, right, you're the CEO because you founded the company, right? But if you know these guys, their demeanor isn't necessarily the kind of guy you would expect to have, jostled and fought their way up the corporate ladder, right? And they didn't need it because they were the founders. But that's how I became a C-level exec in Silicon Valley, because I was the founder, right? So I could make myself executive chairman and CEO and COO, right? But I think a lot of the same rules apply. It's, try to figure out what is that one or two things that are viewed as superpowers within the industry or that company, and forget about everything else. Like on Wall Street, and even now, like I will admit, I'm a terrible manager. I'm not good at managing people, right? But what I realized on Wall Street, nobody cares about management. What they care about is, can you sell and can you generate clients, right? In Silicon Valley, right? And this is again my perspective, but I've been in Silicon Valley for coming up on 23, 24 years. I don't think people care that much about management either. Like I think what is generally viewed as a superpower in Silicon Valley is product and a combination of product engineering, right? And this is why when you go to any of the big tech companies, many of the senior leaders are actually not great people. They're really good like with figuring out how to Tetris resources to develop a product, and then figure out how to marshal all the other resources within the firm to get that product launched, right? But that tends to be like the superpower that I have found in Silicon Valley, puts you in the HOV lane and moves you up the ladder. It's really product development, product engineering expertise. Now, that's obviously a huge overcharacterization. There are many examples of companies where that's not the case. Just like on Wall Street, in finance, there are examples of leaders who are good managers. But I think when you look at the preponderance of like what are the one or two really important skills that seem to be what most of the senior people have, I do think that's the case. Like in Wall Street, it's salesmanship, and in Silicon Valley, it's like a product background.
Right. So just like execution skills and like.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you know, being a product person, and I'm not a good product person, but like being a good product person, I think is like being a good CEO of a product, right? Like you are a CEO of a product, right? So you kind of have to have a CEO mentality, but instead of like a CEO running like a company with lots of different functions, you're in charge of like this one thing, right? And then you need to think about, how do I get all the resources within the company to work in concert together to develop this one thing? And then how do I leverage marketing and finance to make sure that this thing goes out correctly? But I do think the best product people I've worked with do have a CEO mentality, albeit on a more micro level.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate that. And it reminded me of something that I like to tell folks is practice makes progress, right? Constantly practicing, and how you found the opportunity to practice with live folks really did give you that real time feedback that, you know, like, oh yeah, I really got to work on that. So really appreciate that answer. And thank you for the question, Kylie. I think Bach also had a question in the chat. Correct me if I'm wrong, incorrectly pronouncing your name, but do you want to go ahead and unmute Bach and ask Dave your question? Are you there, Bach? We can't hear you if you are speaking.
I think Robert has his hand up.
Audio doesn't work. Okay. I'll ask Dave your question. He asks, would you say the same for interacting with executives who are discriminatory in recruiting for management/leadership roles, basically set you up to fail? And he put STEM, or they put STEM or healthcare.
So I'm not exactly sure what the question is. So, because I'm not sure what same you're referring to. But I mean, so if you encounter executives who are discriminatory in nature, right? That's clearly something that you can report, right? It's just a question of whether it's worth your time. I find that if you're thinking about the people coming after you, then you should do it. But I'm not sure it helps you, right? Like it's not gonna convince them to give you the job. And do you really want to work at a company now with a person like that in their recruiting role? So to me, it really comes down to what sense of obligation do you feel you have to other Asian Americans that are gonna interview for that job after you. And for me, I would totally flame this guy and put it online, because like at that point, like you have nothing to lose. You're not gonna work there anyway, right? And people like that should be called out. So I definitely think that, you know, if you're interacting with someone like that, one, I would never want to work there to begin with, right? And then two, I think it behooves you, for the people coming after you, to make sure that this person's boss and the company are aware that they are asking discriminatory questions, are acting in a discriminatory way. And look, nothing galvanizes companies more than bad PR, right? Like, so if you do it correctly, you probably will institute change, but it's not going to get you the job if that's something that you're looking for. And I don't think it would be.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dave. And I definitely agree. We're in a different time right now, right? To not stay silent, speak up, and especially support, you know, the next generation that's coming into, you know, your company. And so I appreciate that answer. So let us know if you'd like if you have a follow-up question, Bach. And then Robert, did you have a question to ask Dave?
I did. Thank you so much, Dave. I was in the middle of driving, and this talk is so inspiring. I actually read your book that I'm sitting in the parking lot just kind of watching.
Okay.
Yeah, and I love your book. Thank you for being so inspiring. So questions twofold. One is, you know, you talked about, you know, making some changes physically, like getting rid of the glasses, you know, doing some work in that sense. You know, did you feel like you had to change your personality in some sense in order to make it? I mean, yes, obviously you're making choices in terms of strategic choices around what to do and skill sets, but you know, you seem like a very naturally outgoing person. Did you, I mean, was that something that you were naturally born with, or did you kind of like make a lot of effort in order to change? And I guess the other question is, your post, I guess more post Wall Street career, like how did you make that transition going from an MD, you know, at Jefferies to all the great endeavors that you're doing now?
Yeah, so let me answer both of them, but let me answer the second one because I think that's easier. So basically, I retired. I gave in my walking papers when I turned 40, and I ultimately left at 43 because I agreed that I would stay as long as they needed me to find a replacement. And unfortunately, it took 3 years to find a replacement. But I had saved enough money by the time I turned 40 where I could retire. So at that point, I decided that I wanted to just do whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
And I just focused on things that were really interesting to me, and I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so I worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs my whole career. So I kind of knew the how to raise money, how to put pitch decks together, how to get a seed round done, all that kind of stuff. So in many ways, my functional background at Wall Street actually was very useful for my startup experience. And one of the great lessons or things that really helped me was that all those years of salesmanship in Wall Street were just, you know, translatable across any industry, no matter what I did. So if I was going to do a startup and raise funding for a company, you know, I'd be honing my salesmanship. If I needed to, you know, poach people out of Apple or Samsung and convince them to come join me, I was using my salesmanship, right? If I was trying to get people, the customers, to try our prototype product, right? Like I was using my salesmanship. So I found that a lot of my functional background on Wall Street actually ended up being exactly what helped me in Silicon Valley. But I think being able to be financially secure made a huge difference because then I didn't have to, you know, go through, frankly, a lot of the other struggles that I think other entrepreneurs have when they have no nest egg and they don't have anything to fall back on.
Right.
And that's why now, even today, I just work on stuff that I like, and I only work with companies where I like those companies. There are plenty of companies that call me, and I just say I'm not interested because I'm not running a fund. I only invest my own money, and I only work with people I like.
Right.
And that formula has actually worked really well, but that's not a scalable model for a lot of people. So that's how I made that transition. On your first question, but you know, and I talk about this a little bit in my book. So I've been pretty transparent about this, but like, no, I was completely different growing up. So, you know, I was teased, I was called Elephant Boy, I was called Monster, I was stared at all the time. I spent, you know, up until the age of 18, I had 11 surgeries. I was in the hospital all the time. I had no friends. I mean, it was pretty bleak. Okay, just to be really transparent, right? I was not outgoing. I was not a good speaker. The one thing that I learned early on, which was my superpower, was that I was really good at taking tests. Like I was actually really good at taking tests, right? So I was able to get like really great grades and, you know, coasted through Penn, you know, did a dual degree in 4 years. Like all that stuff was like pretty easy. And actually, I think that it wasn't obvious to me that my background and my demeanor was fatal until I started working in investment banking. And then I looked around, I realized, you know, if I don't change, like I'm going off a cliff at some point. Because I look around and the people above me, the people that really succeed, are nothing like me, right? They're all these white guys who are like frat boys, and they're chummy and they know how to bullshit, right? And I'm not like that at all, right? And so I think for me it was really a mindset where you know, I didn't talk about this, but I do in the book. Like, you know, my family, we were at poverty, we had no money. My dad abandoned us, and so for me, failure wasn't an option. Like I needed to be able to support myself and my mother, and so a light went off in my mind, which is like I got to step out of my comfort zone, and I've got to develop some of these other skills, or my career in this field is going to be over before you know it. Because what I do, you know, the dirty little secret is that once you get into Wall Street, you realize that the job's not hard, right? So you're kind of working away and go, oh man, like I get paid a lot of money to basically do Excel and PowerPoint, right? And at some point, someone's going to call me out and go like, why are we paying you 200 grand to do Excel and PowerPoint? Like we can get some guys from China or India to do this, right? So I made a huge concerted effort to start to change like my mentality. And a lot of it was driven by the failure wasn't an option. Like I needed to change if I ever wanted to get ahead. And it became, Robert, it became, self-reinforcing because when I shared some of the, the practicing and pitching that I was doing, right? And the first, couple dozen times, I was terrible. Like it was, I could see I was boring people to tears. And I started to, we didn't have YouTube like you have now, but like I started to read books about presentation skills and like, okay, how do you get people to engage, right? And I talk about this in my book too. Like I started to have like 3 or 4 go-to stories, 3 or 4 go-to jokes, icebreakers, but like real laugh out loud type stuff, right? Like, and I knew that, okay, I'll just use these as the icebreaker, right? When I have a meeting with someone, and then it'll slowly build upon itself. And so after a while, it just, I think it became, kind of more natural. But even now, like I'm not a big fan of like putting people into a box of introvert versus extrovert. Like I would much rather spend all my time with my 2 boys than going to some party and like schmoozing with tons of people. But when I was an MD and I was running a group, that's what I did. Like I did it all the time. But I didn't like it, but I knew I had to in order to succeed.
Right. Great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah, all part of the job, right, Dave?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when it's funny, desperation can really unlock a lot of your capabilities. And for me, that's certainly what it did.
Right. And you touched on a word, scarcity, right, in your presentation, and kind of taking advantage, unfortunately, having to take advantage of that scarcity mindset that we have, especially coming as either immigrant, refugees, families raised by, our parents in poverty. I resonate with that so much because it's just, we have to, just like you said, you just have to do what you have to do. But I like how Robert kind of phrased that question too, because you weren't changing to where you pushed your morals, right, and what you believe in and your passions. You weren't changing in that sense, but you changed where you had to do what you had to do to get ahead, right, and to move forward and provide for yourself and your family, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk a little bit about this too, and I'm very open about this. Like I have left a lot of money on the table, a lot of money, by not compromising my ethics or doing anything untoward or illegal in any nature. And lots of people do that. I unfortunately, I had 2 partners who one was Steve Bannon, who I think is currently being indicted, and then the other is a guy who, this all came out in the Wall Street Journal. Like he was committing all kinds of like shenanigans. With his wife doing, threesomes and foursomes to get business. I mean, just crazy stuff, right? So, and I will tell you is that those 2 are only the ones that have been exposed, right? So there are lots of people who are willing to do whatever it takes. And my view is you just gotta be able to live with yourself, right? And I certainly don't ever want to do anything where I can't look at myself in the mirror or I can't, be proud of what I've done to my 2 boys. But yeah, it's definitely important to recognize that. And there's so much temptation in these high-powered industries because there's so much money at stake. And it's not just Wall Street, right? You see this in Silicon Valley all the time. And I always tell people I mentor, like, don't do it. Like, it's just not worth it. You're not going to be the richest person in the world. I'm sorry, right? That's already taken by somebody else. So, at some point, enough is enough, and then focus on other things that enrich you.
Right. And then like, what is the need to be the richest person in the world either? Is how what I look at it. It's like, have enough for you, right? Have enough to take care of you, your family, and have the things that sure you want to have, but it really is about living that life that you want, right? And it doesn't mean all the riches in the world per se.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so thank you. Let me get to Bach, that question that popped in the chat, and then Alice, and then we will wrap it up. We still have time. We're really good on time. So thank you all for your amazing questions. And of course, thank you, Dave. Sure. So Bach said, in addition to preparation, practice, and reading books, do you have any other recommendations for self-improvement and change?
Yeah, so here's the really big one. And unfortunately, I think you can there's lots of different ways to do this. And I actually go through kind of a laundry list, but the big one is identifying your own blind spots. So every single one of us, me included, right? We have massive blind spots, but we don't know what they are, right? We all think we're really funny. We all think we're really interesting. We all think we're amazing, right? But we're not, right? We all have big flaws. And it's so easy for us to point these out in other people, right? We're like, man, that guy's clueless. He has no idea nobody likes him. Or that woman, she thinks she can get promoted. There's zero chance, right, of that, right? And you got to stop and ask yourself, like, okay, what makes you so special that you don't have the same blind spot that you're pointing out in other people? And the reality is you do, right? And so I think that one of the biggest things I tell people, that have worked for me and I mentor is you got to figure out your blind spots, right? And you got to determine, are they fatal or not? Because not all blind spots are fatal, right? But you got to figure those out early in your career, because by the time you get to my age, like, it's hard to change, right? So you want to figure those out early. And a lot of people have a really hard time figuring that out, because despite them saying they're open to criticism, 99% of us don't want criticism. Like, we don't want to hear it, right? And so there are a couple ways that I've done it. I mean, one is I have a small group of friends who I got close to in college and early in my career. We all started investment banking together, and we're all brutally honest with one another, right? Like, we are just brutally honest. And we know that when we criticize each other, it comes from a place of love. It's not like, hey, I'm trying to put you down. I'm actually trying to make you a better person. And you know what? You come across as kind of an ass, or you're really arrogant, or like you have zero patience with people, right? And so I think try to find that small tribe of people, if you can, that are willing and able to give really unadulterated feedback to you, and then you should reciprocate. But I will tell you that giving constructive criticism is a skill. Like, a lot of people say they want it, but they don't really want it. And so if you do it the wrong way, you can actually blow up those relationships. And so that's something that I've actually gotten really good at. Like, most people say that one of the things that I'm really good at is actually delivering bad news. And it's taken me a long time to get there, but like, I try to give constructive criticism to not only my clients, but also my friends and people that need that kind of like that no BS filter, right? To figure out, like, okay, what are the things I really need to improve upon? And so I'd say that you can get a lot from, like, preparing and reading books and stuff like that. But like, I have found nothing more valuable than that. Like, really someone that you love, that you trust, and just say, hey, Dave, like, these are a couple of things that you're really bad at, and you got to then determine, okay, are those fixable, and are they fatal, right? Like, because some of them could be fatal for your career, and if they're fatal, then you got to really fix those. You got to fix those. If they aren't fatal, then nobody's perfect. So you just got to figure out, okay, Dave's impatient. He's not a great manager. I got to make sure that I always hire people or have a team around me with people that are more patient and are better at managing people, because I'm never going to change. That's just kind of the way I am. So I'd say that's one that really pops up, in my mind.
Yeah, thank you, Dave, for that. And it kind of, something that I practice too is having that core support circle, of your really great friends that will tell you straight out the truth, and who you are, or who you're coming, what you're, just like you said. And I think sometimes when we do get those constructive criticisms, it hurts, right? Because sometimes you're like, oh, am I really like that? Or it hits on an insecurity maybe that you have, right, or had. And to hear it out loud from someone else is an unexpected, blow sometimes. And it actually made me think of something that happened to me recently, a few weeks ago, that I was like, let me think about this, because this isn't the first person that told me this. And of course, I went to one really trusted person within my core circle, asked for their feedback, what their thoughts were, and then went to the second person and then kind of collected that feedback and processed it. And it was really helpful. So I think that is really, really good advice, having that core support group of folks to really tell you, straight, with no, hidden agenda, no intentions to hurt your feelings or anything like that, but to tell you, from their heart that, hey, this is really how I see you, or this is really how it could be taken, and take that to heart. And like you said, analyze, who am I as a person? What's my identity? Is this fatal to that? Or does this support that? Or do I need this person in my life? Or is it time to outgrow this person, right? Or who is this person really? So truly very helpful. So Alice had a question, and then Kiko also shared some books in the chat. So thank you. Alice, did you want to go ahead and unmute?
Yes, thank you so much, Dave, for empowering us and sharing all your path and insights. And I have a question, like, how do you find your mentor back in the days, and which one you think has inspired you, like, to change the most? And then I have a second question as well. And you're talking about like you retire by 30. And we do like want to know, like, since we are not like come from Wall Street and in investment stage, like how can we all, like the younger generation, to build wealth, to kind of like retire young? Like, can you give us like some secret about it? Thank you so much.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So on the mentor question, so there's a priority stack, okay? And what I always tell people is that if you're looking for a mentor for your career, or ideally for a particular company, always try to find at the top of the list someone of the same gender and ethnicity as you, right? Particularly if you're Asian American, right? Because that person will have gone through probably some of the things, some of the challenges that you're going to face. And if you can develop a kind of a parent-child relationship with that mentor, which I think is really the best way to have a mentor. But if you can develop a little bit of that parent-child relationship, then they will show you where the landmines are and where all the HOV lanes are. They will look out for you, and that person can become like a huge advocate and supporter for you and sponsor when the time comes for compensation and for promotion. So that would be my number one goal. Like if I was working at any company, if I was starting, I would try to find someone, in my case, Asian man within a company that has broken through or is well respected, and I would pledge fealty to them. Like I would say, hey, can I take you out for lunch? Can you be my mentor? Can I help you with anything, right? Any projects you need done, et cetera, right? Now, unfortunately, because we're Asian, right? As we talked about, like there are just fewer numbers, right, at the senior level, right? And those people are probably getting bombarded, right, with requests all the time. And when I was at Jefferies, because we were pretty small, there were no senior Asian people. There was one guy, but he was kind of a mid-level guy. But going back to the blind spot thing, he was one of those people that we all knew was going to get flushed out, but except for him. Like he thought he was going to get promoted to MD, and he never made it, right? And so there was nobody for me to gravitate to. And one of the benefits of being at a small firm was I decided, you know what, I'm just going to aim as high as I can. And so I developed a mentor relationship with the CEO of our firm. And we had 200 employees, which still made it manageable. And he became my lifelong mentor. And it started with, me sitting next to him in investment committee meetings. And then it was just kind of me sharing my life story. I think he came from a very poor background. He's a white man. He came from a very poor background, but so much of my story resonated with him. And I think so he saw in me, even though I'm different ethnicity, he saw in me someone that reminded him of his son, his grandson. And we stayed very close friends throughout our entire lives. And he actually read my book, and he wrote an endorsement for my book, which helped a lot, right? Because someone might read my book and go like, yeah, how much of this stuff did he make up, right? Well, I didn't make up any of it, and the CEO of our firm read my book and endorsed it, right? Like so, he's been my lifelong mentor. And so I say to people, try to find someone that's the same gender or ethnicity. If not, just try to get someone as senior, as powerful and successful in the firm as you can, and just kind of work your way down. But the secret, I think, to having a great mentor is to really invest in that relationship, because there are so many mentors and mentees that I've seen, and I've been a recipient of this, where you have this initial meeting or discussion, somebody pours out their heart to you and they ask you all this advice. You give them all this advice because you've been through it, and then you don't hear from them ever again. And you feel like a jilted parent, right? You feel like someone's like, hey, you asked me for that time, and I took time out of my busy schedule, and you don't even send me a follow-up email or anything saying what happened. Did you take my advice? Did you get that job? Did you get that project? I don't know, right? And what happens is that starts to really calcify the mentors, right? Like I'll be honest, like for me, I get asked all the time, right? And I really size them up. I try to figure out, okay, one, is this person someone that I really want to mentor? And then two, do they really value me, or are they just talking to like 12 people and then I'll never hear from them again, right? So I think the way that you develop a really good mentor relationship, going full circle, is like I said, treat it like a parent relationship, treat it like a doting mom, a doting dad, and just give them updates. So you don't have to be like hugely invasive. It could just be quick email thanking them, hey, that meeting we had was fantastic. This is what I ended up doing, and this is why I did it, right? And happy to give you more color if you want, right? And then once a year, hey, why don't I buy a cup of coffee, or let's have lunch, and let me tell you where I'm at in my career, right? And I'll tell you, as a mentor, nothing makes you more proud of a mentee that has taken your advice and has done well. Like there's no better feeling than that, right? So those are just some tips that I would share, like in terms of like how to think about the mentor-mentee relationship. Let me answer your second question. So look, it comes down to cost of capital and lifestyle creep, right? Like there are plenty of people in the world that can work in a corporate job, don't need to work on Wall Street, don't need to work in Silicon Valley, and are retired, right? The way they do that is that they don't have the toniest house on the block. They don't buy like the fanciest car, right? They might live outside of the main area. And so I think a lot of it comes down to what kind of lifestyle do you want to have, and then what is the cost of capital, if you will, what kind of return do you need to generate in order to live that life that you want. And look, I'm not saying that this is the right number or not, but Danny Kahneman, who I mentioned earlier, the Nobel Prize winning guy, he actually did a lot of research on this particular topic around like what is the number that people need in order to be happy, right? And then above what number is there like hugely diminishing returns where every extra dollar doesn't make any sense, right? And what he found, and this is kind of 2020, right? So maybe not accounting for inflation right now, but like around like $90,000 a year, right? Seems to be like that number. And so $90,000 a year is not out of the realm of possibility for a lot of people if you save every penny, you invest prudently, and then maybe you have a part-time job or some side consulting thing. But I know many people where $90,000 a year is what they spend on toys, because they got this huge lifestyle like that they want. So I think a big part of it is, what do you want? What is your true kind of cost of capital? What do you really need to live a happy life? And then from there, just by division, you can figure out, okay, what does my nest egg need to be? And I don't think you need to work on Wall Street or Silicon Valley to get to that number. Because I certainly have lots of friends who haven't worked in those industries, and have worked in traditional corporate America and have retired. Maybe not at 40, but like maybe at 50. But they're living a modest life, but they're totally happy with it. So it's really, to me, it's really more about like what does that hurdle rate need to be, and what does that nest egg need to be in order for you to live a life that you're satisfied with, and not get caught up with the Joneses or what other people are doing.
Right, that's the detrimental part, right? It's comparing ourselves to others, and whose standards are those? So I think that's great. We're all different, right? We have to look at what we want essentially, and how do we get there? And then it reminds me that we weren't taught financial literacy in school, right? So it's one of those things where we weren't taught this to be financially independent. We were really taught to be worker bees, in the American public school system. So it's kind of like reevaluating that. And it's never too late, right? So work on those things. But thank you so much, Dave, for such a great session overall. We learned so much. I know I learned so much. And thank you all so much for your questions as well. Such great questions. Round of applause for Dave.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so I shared Dave's contact information in the chat. So Dave said he checks all of his emails and he responds. So make sure you take that from the chat along with his website. I also shared AAPA's contact information and my contact information. I think I put my email in there. So if you have any questions and would like to stay in touch with us, please do. Bach also shared some great organizations that we do partner with as well. So copy those links down. And then it would be really helpful if you all fill out the feedback form for us. So we provide these idea talks and invite Dave to come on and talk because of the feedback that we receive from folks through our feedback form. So if this was helpful for you, if you want to see more events like this, please help us by filling out that feedback form. It is truly important. That's how we come up with this programming. And then I also shared the next Idea Talks that is happening next week, actually, and that's on personal branding to be heard and in the workplace. So following in line with this leadership, speaking up, and especially in the time that we're in right now, the workplace, right, in our professional lives. So that's the registration link for that. And so lastly, I want to share that our gala is coming up. And you actually might see Dave there. So Dave and I had a short little conversation about that. It's in October 20th, a Thursday evening. So hopefully you all will be able to come and celebrate with us in person. And you might be able to shake Dave's hand as well. So that is the save the date. And with that, we are just a few minutes over, but thank you all so much for being here. I hope this was a great event for you. And again, thank you, Dave, so much. Lots of praise coming in for you through the chat. So thank you for being here this Saturday.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
And thank you, everyone, for your questions and sticking with us. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. That's it.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.